Very few core hunters can say that they haven't changed on the fly. And what I mean by that is changing to your hunting situation. Last year we had a perfect example. We're going down to Illinois, had already pre-hung the whole farm, had it scouted, put trail cameras in, excited to get down there. It's prime time of the rut, it's November. We get down there and what do we meet at the gate? A logging truck. I stopped, talked to the logger a little bit, found out where they had already cut. Of course, they cut through the core bedding area. We sat in a different stand. That night we pulled the cameras out. Here we had some pictures, some giant deer, really nice 3- and 4-year-old bucks. What do? You know, we already knew where they're gonna be working, so we improvised. We hunted other stands that weren't necessarily our #1 picks. You know, we hunted areas where we thought the deer weren't pressured, and we almost had an opportunity at shooting a great buck. No, we didn't tag a deer, but it was our best chance of doing so because we moved those stands and we went to other locations. Another thing that can go wrong as a hunter is the weather. You never know what the weather's going to be. If it's normal in normal conditions, and what do I mean by normal is if the weather is the average temperature that that region normally achieves, the deer are probably going to move as they normally would. That means, you know, what kind of food are they on? In the fall up here in the Midwest, if it's November, it means corn. Corn's king. They're going to be hitting those fields. You know, but if it warms up a little bit and you have some green, they're probably going to go after some of those greener clovers and some of those other areas again. So you really need to focus on what the weather's doing. If it's going to rain or if the wind's high, they may stick closer to their bedding areas. Therefore, you want to position yourself in a stand that's closer to those bedding areas. You always want to look at every kind of factor that can impact the hunt and therefore position yourself where you're most likely to be successful. If you're hunting on your own piece of property, you already know what the deer are probably going to do, but it's useful to use trail cameras. You know, as a guy, I own 300 acres, I can't hunt in every stand. So I put my cameras throughout my piece of property so that I can monitor where the deer are. Therefore, I can pick the best stand. If I know a big deer is in one particular area, I'm going to hunt that area a little harder. You know, sometimes you don't have the luxury of doing that when you're hunting on a leased piece of property or with an outfitter. Bring those cameras along or use their advice. That outfitter's there all the time. Find out where he's seeing big deer. You know, put some trail cameras out there and see what the deer are doing. Again, as a hunter by yourself, you can't see the entire area. By using the trail cameras to be your eyes, you're going to become a better hunter.
Adapting to what the deer are eating is key to finding them and then discovering the routes they're using. But if you can't find the deer, how do you know what they're eating?
Let's say I'm a hunter that doesn't really understand the deer pattern on a particular piece of property. What would I do? You know, I'm going to grab my trail cameras, I'm going to go to the food source, and I'm going to start looking at the trails going away from the food source back into the timber or draws. I'm going to try to figure out where those deer are bedded. I'm going to find an area where 3 or 4 trails come together in one flat area, and that's where I'm going to put my camera. If I can cover all those trails with one camera and it has enough distance to get the picture, I'm just going to set it up like that. Now, if you're in a particular spot where those trails converge, but it's not a pinpoint spot, I'm going to try to do something to draw the deer in. For me, that's a mock scrape. I'm going to put a mock scrape. I'm going to just kick a big black circle in the dirt with my boot. I'm going to use a dripper. I'm going to put scent in there. I'm going to hang the camera on that. Because what that's going to do is any deer that's in that vicinity, given the different wind situations you're going to get, sooner or later is going to smell that dripper. Once they know the scrape's in there, they're going to come and routinely check that scrape, especially during the pre-rut. So therefore, you're getting pictures of all the bucks in that area. Now, if you take a particular piece of property and spread out 5 or 6 cameras, you can effectively look at 600 to 700 acres of property and know pretty much what bucks you have in that piece of property at any given time. When you're going to go into the woods, be scent-free as possible. Take that shower, make sure your clothes are clean. When you're following that trail from the food source to the bedding area, what are you looking for? You know, you want the biggest trail out of the food source that goes back into the timber. Follow that back until you find a maze of trails, and all these maze of trails are probably going to look like they're originating from one spot. And what you want to do with that one spot is stay out of it. That's the bedding area. It could be a marshy area, it could be a spot where there's treetops, it could be a high bluff, it could be any of those things. But once you find a bunch of trails that are going into the area, you're very close to the bedding area. You don't want to walk through there during the deer season because you're going to spook out what's in there. Once you've found that bedding area, you don't want to go any further. You don't want to put your camera in the bedding area. You want to back out a little bit, find a strategic spot to place that camera where you think you can cover the most trails, or put your mock scrape and utilize that spot. You know, another tip is if you really want to go through that bedding area, don't do it during the hunting season. You know, I'm an avid shed antler hunting, and when we're shed antler hunting, we go through every bedding area I can find, because I want to utilize some information there. I want to find out how big that area is, you know, and even in the winter, you can pretty much count how many beds are in there, and it'll give you a good idea how many does are in that area, because the does always beds in groups. If you find 5 beds all clustered together, you're probably dealing with 2 does, 2 mature does and 3 fawns, or 3 mature does and 2 fawns. It's really not important that you know what those animals are. It's important that you know that that's a doe bedding area, because those are the areas that you want to remember come next fall. In the postseason, now we've determined where all these different doe bedding areas are. Let's put them on a map. You know, when you can visually see where all these areas are, it's easy to connect the dots and see how these bucks are probably traveling. The next thing to do is hang stands. Where do you want to hang? What should you consider? Big part in the Midwest up here, or anywhere for that matter of fact, is the wind. You know, here where we are in Wisconsin, it's almost always west or northwest winds in the fall. So I hang most of my sets, and when I mean most, I mean 75% of my sets are set for a west or northwest wind. You know, but you also need other options, because you're going to have that occasional south wind, you're going to have an occasional east wind. You want to make sure you have a stand location for each possible wind so that you can hunt on every day that you have the option of hunting. Next, now we have our stands placed. Let's look at the weather conditions on this particular day I'm going to go out and hunting. Is it warm? If it's warm, the deer are probably going to move a little bit later. You want to get closer to the bedding area. If it's early in the season when it's warm, the deer are still on a feeding pattern. They're going to be hitting those green fields. If it's later in the fall, they're probably going to go after the protein, which is your corn and your acorns. How about wind? You know, the windier it is, the deer here in the Midwest will shut down a little bit. You want to get closer to the bedding areas. Other spots like Kansas, they're used to the wind, so they move all day long. Again, you want to take into considerations what that weather condition is. Rain's another one. Light rain, the deer will continue to move, especially if it's cool during the rut. It seems like they like the little bit of moisture. Early season, if it rains, it kind of shuts them down. They just lay down. Again, you want to get closer to that bedding area. So you really have to factor all those things in when you pick a stand. If you want to be a successful hunter, to have those other stands all set for multiple winds, multiple conditions, look at those external factors and pick your best stand so you can harvest mature deer.